Hello, everyone. I wanted to just do a quick follow-up. I kind of do the same thing that I used to do as a classroom teacher whenever I present or I train somewhere. I go through the process of self-reflection. And as many of you I know, as teachers do the same thing, thinking about kids, thinking about situations, thinking about what I could have said or done differently. One of the things that kind of I don't think I did real well was explaining the process of how we choose to feel. That is an adult perspective. So I want to make that very clear that when we're looking at emotional intelligence in adults, particularly those who have experienced trauma, I think with anybody, but I come from the lens of trauma just because I experienced trauma. And so what happens into adulthood is one of the goals that I think, or one of the things we hope to accomplish is the self-awareness to the point of understanding how we can regulate or manage our emotional state. And so that really is a goal because I think growing up, what happens is when we are impacted by trauma, we are very often in a hypervigilant reactive state, right? So something happens and we react and we go to either protect ourselves in whatever that looks like. That could be, again, in an aggressive way. It could be in a way that is sort of where we internalize it and kind of become what I do this because for me, it's about like getting smaller. Like the smaller I can get, the less that I get under the radar, I can, where folks won't notice me. And so we all have different protective factors or protective approaches to help keep us safe. And what happens is that a lot of us then get into this adulthood phase of life and we still have remnants of that. We still have, because the first several years of our lives created sort of the neurosynaptic connections that then become the lens of how we experience the world. And so into adulthood, even if we're out of the situation, those behaviors and those patterns of behavior are still really a part of our experience of life. And so one of the goals, and I'm going to speak for myself, and what I hope when I'm working with children, what I hope in everything that I do and everything that I say is to help them help give skills, help develop skills that will help them in life, not just academically or in terms of their career and workforce or college and career readiness. It's not just that. It's about how they are in life and how they experience relationships, because that's often where those of us who have had trauma, we tend to have a difficult time in our relationships. And that might be relationships just within family units. It could be relationships with a significant other, intimate relationships. We tend to have challenges with that whole vulnerability and loving and being loved, and which is an attachment thing that happens. Remember, I think I talked about that first to third year in life. Again, not that we don't continue to work on and develop attachment, but those are sort of critical periods in our life. So one of the things that that I hope is that kids will, with this foundational experience, and I'll talk about what it looks like for kids, that they can see that they get to choose how they feel about situations. So I'll give you an example of this. Let's say somebody says something derogatory to me or yells at me or cusses me out or whatever. Now I'm going to, right, because I'm human, I'm going to have a reaction to that. And we're all going to have a reaction based on who we are in our personalities, our that DNA plays into it, our temperament, and our life experiences. It's sort of all kind of mixed in together. And so someone says something derogatory to me and I might, boom, react to that. So I might feel whatever I feel in that moment. It could be frustration, irritation, sadness. And I tend to not use angry. And the reason why is because early on in my studies, I learned that anger was a secondary emotion. And so what that means is that anger is a way that we convey the message. And it's very powerful, anger, the expression of anger. But when you take and you really look at anger, when you look at it, it's there's often an undercurrent or something underneath that is being masked by anger. So it might be fear of being left, isolation, abandonment, irritation, anxiety. And so I try to use, especially with kids, I try to use words that really help identify what they might be feeling, as opposed to simply just using anger or mad as the overarching. I want to know, oh, it looks like you might be feeling frustrated because you tried to do this 4 times. And that fifth time, I could see your face, and I would describe that, right? I could see your face, and your face kind of looked like this. And I'm just wondering if you might be feeling frustrated. And so I try to go to that level. So let's say, going back to my story, you say something derogatory to me, and I'm going to have a reactive moment, right? I'm going to, whatever it is. So I'm going to feel frustrated. So I'm feeling super frustrated. Maybe I'm gritting my teeth, and my shoulders go up. And so I'm feeling really frustrated in the moment. One of the things that happens with enough practice, and this is why I do the think, do, be process. One of the things that happens with enough practice, and I'm talking, for me, it's been years of practice, is that I will have that moment of reactivity, right? Where I react, and I'll sense it in my body, and being tuned into that, like tuned into my shoulders, tuned into my jaw, tuned into my stomach. Like sometimes I carry it in my stomach. And so in my belly, I'm feeling like really distressed or nervous. I'll feel it right then, and I'm aware of it. Some initially, like years ago, I wasn't aware of it. I didn't even know I was walking around with my jaw tightened. Like I had no idea, because that was just a chronic experience in my life that I just always walked around like that. And then finally, when I started doing the deep breathing practices, I was like, whoa, I can feel the difference when I release the tension of my jaw. And so I've become really aware of when I'm in that reactive state, and I can sense where that's happening physiologically. The next part of this, once we become aware, and that's self-awareness. That's self-awareness for little kids, and that, or kids in general. And that's self-awareness for adults. So remember that emotional intelligence and social emotional development, it totally aligns. And so once we have an awareness, what am I experiencing physically, and what, like naming the emotion, like what am I really feeling? What's going on here? And oftentimes, not always, there's always exceptions. And so I'm not here to argue whether it's an always or not, but oftentimes those of us who've experienced trauma because things were done to us, sometimes we become victim of that experience. And so, which is a normal, natural thing. I'm not saying that, that's a horrible, horrible thing. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that we sometimes, especially as young children, don't feel like we have control over what is happening. And we don't, because, right, we're kids. We don't have control over the domestic violence we're being witness to, the abuse that we are living with, the inconsistencies in our home. There are lots of things that significantly impact us. And so when, as into adulthood, where we get to make choices, and maybe we're trying to choose better relationships, better circumstances, even the way that we look at life. And so when we get to that, where I'm noticing what's happening with me physiologically, I'm also aware of my emotional state, and I can label that, like really label it, not I'm angry. And this is where it ties into that she made me so upset. Like she made me feel like nothing, or he made me da 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 da, right? And so that perspective, when we do that, we give our power away. And I'm talking about adulthood right now. I'm talking about adulthood. We give our power away. So if I say, you made me feel like nothing, right? I'm giving my power to you. I'm making you in charge of my feelings. What you did may have been completely unacceptable and like not okay, right? Like not okay with me, not okay in the world, not okay. So what you did may have been not okay, but I get to choose. I get to choose. So I get to choose to be frustrated, irritated. I get to choose to forgive. I get to choose to be at peace. I get to choose to hold on to the resentment for years and years and years. Like I get to choose that. And when we get to that place, I think in our adulthood, usually that doesn't happen, especially with kiddos who experience trauma when they're young. But into our adulthood, when we get to that place where we recognize that my well-being is based on choices I make, and that can include how I think and how I feel. So just give you a little side story. So I grew up in a family where people held grudges. So much so my mother, who was abusive to me, and she did what was done to her. I mean, she didn't know how else to parent. And so she did what was done to her. And maybe she didn't abuse as much as she got abused, you know, so maybe that was progress for her. But part of the pattern in my family is to hold grudges and to hold resentment, like really hold resentment. And we wouldn't even know why. Like we wouldn't even know why there was resentment or why people weren't talking to each other. It's like something would happen, and the way that it was received and the way that it was processed and the way that, you know, people would take it personal, what would happen is then we would no longer see them or we would no longer see each other. And then years would pass. And so part of that pattern of behavior, unfortunately, when you're exposed to it, becomes a part of your pattern unless you intentionally decide otherwise. Well, in my family, as I'm sharing the story of my family, my mom was really good. She's really good at holding on to resentment and grudges, so much so that I really haven't seen her in like 30 years. So she disowned me a long time ago. And so what happens for me, you know, I want to be different. I want to change. I want things to I don't want to live that life anymore. I don't want drama in my life. And so I go to try to make an intentional decision to not be that, right? But what happens because of my personality and my life experiences, that tendency starts to creep up. That tendency of wanting to withhold love, to hold resentment, to not let go of things. So one of the aha moments for me, and I think for many people, is recognizing that I don't have to be a victim to that I get to choose. I get to choose forgiveness, which I have. I've forgiven my mom for everything. I hold no resentment whatsoever. And I know she did the best she knew how to do given her life circumstances and her experiences. So it's like I get to choose to live in peace. I get to choose, and I tell the story, and I can tell the story from a place of wisdom and understanding rather than a place of resentment. And so when I talk about choice, it's not that when you're 5 and you're 7 and you're 12 that coming through the lens of you're choosing to be upset. That's not, no, 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 because that's not how it works. You know, when we're little, and even into our adulthood, we have a reactive state, right? That fight or flight or freeze. We're in that reactive place of trying to protect ourselves. And it is going to come from our experiences prior to that. So that's the way we're going to respond or react. And then we move through the limbic system, right? Am I still loved? And I'm starting to worry about my relationships and my connections. And some of us get really disconnected from that. And so that looks different for all of us. And then the hope to finally move into our prefrontal cortex, where we can actually make some good decisions about the situation. And at that level is where we get to choose. But with kids, they haven't developed that yet. They haven't developed, we're in that co-regulation process of life, where they are learning. And really what it looks like for me in my head is the mechanics of how a brain is built. And so when they are young, they are in that very initial stages of just growing that awareness of what am I experiencing, what am I feeling, where am I feeling it, and labeling it. And then into the self-regulation piece, which is that being able to manage those emotions. that's at the level where we can start to implement, okay, let's take a deep breath, let's figure out what we can do to help move us through the experience, and then we can choose something different, right? And so we are going to have a reactive state. I still have a reactive state. We all do. And then, but we can move into the experience of learning strategies to help us find the calm. And for all of us, it's different. Sometimes it's taking a walk, taking a couple deep breaths. Deep breaths are my go-to. And one of the things that I do is the breathing where I go in one nostril, out the other, in that nostril, out the other. That is almost an immediate for me to find that sense of calm. And so I can find those strategies, right? And for some kids, they need some physical movement. They need, some kids need the squishy ball and a couple deep breaths. Everyone's different. This is what our job, I think, is so fascinating, because we get to figure that out for each and every student we have. So we move from that state of finding our calm and then coming to the place where we can get to the prefrontal cortex and we can start to talk about things. Now, in that talk about phase, I'm going to go into the language in the next video, but in that talk about phase, or even as this whole process is happening, we want to make sure we clear away from words that might have an undercurrent or may be received where there's guilt or shame about what we are experiencing. We really want to be allies with kiddos. We really want to help them see us adults as someone they can trust, someone they can rely on, someone that will help them and not judge them, be open-hearted. This is so critically important because those of us who've experienced trauma sometimes don't trust grown-ups. We are waiting to be lied to. Uh, we're waiting for them to fail us. We're waiting for those broken promises. We bring in our stories. And so sometimes it's harder for kids. And I think the older they are, the deeper the patterns are of their experiences. And so sometimes it's harder to try to chip in to that heart space, to that heart level where they can trust. And so that's why for me, the language is so critically important, and our body language, our tone, all of those things are so critically important, because a lot of times trust is an issue. Like, I don't know if I can trust you because I've not had a whole lot of grownups who have been trustworthy in my life. We actually, in one of my schools that I was administrator of, we used to use the language of grownups are here to help. And we said grownups instead of teachers because there were lots of grownups in our school. There was a secretary and we had bus drivers. And so grownups are here to help. So at this school, grownups are here to help you, because a lot of our kids saw grownups as the threat, as the person or the people who hurt. And so we really wanted to shift that understanding, because the hope for us was that they could leave our school and know that there are adults that they can trust, that they can seek out people. And it may not be our family. It may be, people at church. It may be people in your, group, your sports group, your coach. It could be people that are outside of who is supposed to take care of you, and that's hard. That's a hard thing for kids to understand. So anyway, I hope that helps. It didn't sit well with me, that I didn't feel like I did a really good job at explaining this in detail. So I hope that this helps build some context in it, and it helps give a better understanding of sort of the lens that I see this experience through. So thank you all very much, and I look forward to working with you. Bye-bye.